What you are listening to now is Californian band Dengue Fever in 2011, covering one of the most controversial songs in the history of the world. And when I say controversial, I don't mean like Link Wray's instrumental, Rumble, that was banned from radio for fear it would incite gang violence, or Gloomy Sunday getting banned from the BBC because it was supposed to encourage suicide. I mean controversial like the song was used as an excuse to kill hundreds, maybe thousands of people, and decades later imprint images of terror into millions of children's brains. And worse, all this perversion was done to a song originally written in praise of a simple, edible weed. Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Songlines with DJ Jimmy Trash, the show about flashpoints in history where music, politics, and culture are inseparable. This episode is about a song called Genjer Genjer. I first heard this song from the musician Tomi Simatupang. Tomi had been my friend ever since I moved to Berlin in 2006. In those early days, he had the reputation of a tormented genius, someone who would play and write incredible songs that made him the darling of the Berlin anti-folk community. But also, he could be a recluse with his own pain and demons. This is a clip of Tomi from Uli M. Schuppel's Berlin Song documentary in 2007, showcasing Tomi singing one of his songs spontaneously in a busted-up telephone booth.
Angry clown is dragging me down. Everybody loves me too much. It's so hard to keep in touch. Everybody loves me too much. It's so hard to keep in touch. Everybody loves me too much. It's so hard to keep...
There was a manic energy to him at that time that I didn't understand. In 2015, Tomi asked me to be the promoter for a one-man theater piece he was assembling to tell the story of Genjer Genjer. Genjer Genjer was composed in 1953 by Muhammad Arif in the local angklung style of his home region in Banyuwangi in easternmost Java. What we listen to now is angklung music, the style of music Genjer Genjer was originally written for. It is traditional to the Sundanese people of Indonesia and has dozens of local variants, but is essentially instruments of carved bamboo tubes where each member of an ensemble is responsible for shaking a frame of carved bamboo tubes, resonating their single note in the composition. So you can imagine an angklung ensemble requires intense cooperation and coordination, promoting teamwork, mutual respect, and social harmony. And that's a metaphor for the first thing we need to understand when discussing Indonesian history and culture. It is an archipelago of over 17,000 islands, varying between the intense urban sprawl of Jakarta's 10 million inhabitants to around 6,000 uninhabited islands. This archipelago then hosts 700 languages, over 1,300 ethnicities, and clearly relies on an amount of mutual respect and social harmony, just like the angklung orchestras. That must have been what a saint of a Maya Pahit kingdom meant when he gave Indonesia its modern motto, Unity in Diversity. This motto held fast through hundreds of years under Dutch colonialism and a brief period of Japanese occupation, until the Japanese retreat at the end of World War II, setting up a vacuum of power which allowed a path of self-governance in Indonesia for the first time in centuries. Before their retreat, Japanese occupiers intentionally fostered the nationalist movement in Indonesia, giving them military training to oppose the Dutch, who were keen to return to power after the war. Now let me make it clear, the Japanese were not heroes in any sense, and were accused of the same war crimes while occupying Indonesia as they were anywhere else at that time, including torture, sex slavery, political arrests, and executions. From many villagers' perspectives, the Japanese occupation was just another in a long line of mistreatments. And it was under these circumstances that Genjer Genjer was written. Genjer has been a weed used to feed livestock all over Indonesia. But under the Japanese occupation, poverty, forced labor, and confiscation of crops by the Japanese army forced starving Indonesians to eat genjer themselves. In 1943, Muhammad Arif wrote a wistful hymn to the vegetable that spread across East Java, accompanied by its own dance. Let's note the aching simplicity of the lyrics. Genjer, laying all through the rice fields. The mother of the boy comes to pick genjer. Taking a bunch, she turns away without looking. Now genjer has been brought back home. Every morning, genjer is sold at the market, laid out in rows, tied up to be sold. The mother of the girl buys genjer while carrying a woven bamboo basket. Genjer now can be cooked. Genjer enters the pot of boiling water. Half cooked, it is drained as a side dish. A plate of rice and orange sambal in front. Genjer is eaten with rice. This initial version of the song was pure in its intentions. It was merely honoring the nutritious plant with no political meaning. This is something Arif's son emphasizes. Because of the atrocious accusations the songwriter and his family would have to live with for the rest of their lives. In Indonesian culture, it was common for songs to have, or be given, political meaning through metaphors in order to avoid censorship. Genjer Genjer iconically became an expression of resistance against the Japanese occupation and was sung in the presence of soldiers just to piss them off. Muhammad Arif would later become a card-carrying member of the influential political artist group Lekra, formed in 1950. Lekra was the artistic arm of the PKI, the Indonesian Communist Party. They released manifestos pushing communist realism across all genres, attacked artists who sided with Western imperialism, and supported artists across Indonesia. It is not hard to understand why Arif's Genjer Genjer would attract their attention. In the early 1960s, a speechwriter of President Sukarno, the first Prime Minister of Indonesia, who we are absolutely coming back to, was charmed by a performance of Genjer Genjer. He claimed the song represented the synthesis of, quote, positive tradition with progressive modernity that Lekra was trying to push, and promoted a gamelan version of the song with a more accessible Javanese lyrics. From there, two of the biggest pop stars of Indonesia would record pan-Indonesian hits with the most definitive versions of the song.
Genjer genjer nong kedoan batik keleler. Genjer genjer nong kedoan pating keleler mae dole teko mu putih genjer mae dole teko mu putih genjer oleh sak tenong mungkur sedot sing tole genjer genjer saiki wis digawa mulih.
The version we have been listening to is the best known version by a legitimate triple threat performer in Indonesian culture since the 40s, Bing Slamet, eponymously named after Bing Crosby. Now, Bing's career was anything but political. He received non-stop Lifetime Achievement Awards after his death in 1974 up until today. But the compilation album this song appeared on back in 1965 was issued by the Sukarno government to advertise lenso dancing, Minahasa and Malaccan folk dance, as an alternative to Western rock and roll, in step with the anti-imperialist fervor of his government. Another hit version from that time is by Lilis Suryani. Her version is more mellow, still harrowing and emotional, but more reserved, exchanging the drums for clarinets and saxophones. Suryani, however, was more politically engaged. She was sent to the front line of the Indonesia-Malaysia confrontation, which in itself was a proxy war with the English colonialist powers, to entertain troops in 1964. And she performed in Independence Day celebrations. During the mid-1960s, Suryani recorded numerous patriotic songs and was a friend of Sukarno. However, in 1964, Suryani released a song, Geng Kelenci.
Jakarta, kotaku indah dan megah, disitulah aku dilahirkan. Rumahku di salah satu gang, namanya Gang Kelinci. Entah apa sampai namanya Kelinci, mungkin dulu kerajaan Kelinci. Karena manusia bertambah banyak, kasihan Kelinci terdesak.
This song, which is an utter banger, defied the Sukarno regime already by being a 60s Western twist song. Going deeper, the lyrics speak of rabbits in an overcrowded burrow, a metaphor for modern Indonesia that is not what they were promised, silently criticizing inflation, corruption, and the lack of care for rural areas, which force many Indonesians to the cities for work. It also refers to Sukarno's martial law and suppression of critical voices. And so, with that introduction, we can finally move into the topic of President Sukarno in the Genjer Genjer story. Sukarno had been a prominent leader in the anti-Dutch movement and had coordinated closely with the Japanese occupation as he rose up the nationalist rankings. His path from the end of the war into leadership is impossibly complicated to unpack now. But the main idea of him is that he understood that claiming too much power in the infinitely patchworked Indonesian society would not work immediately after World War II. And he relied on his charisma to push the popular uniting topics of anti-imperialism and a path to democracy. By the time he consolidated power under his plan of guided democracy in 1959, he was walking a very tight line between the Islamic populations, the communists, the military class, as well as the different ethnic groups all over the archipelago. Sukarno had been on America's hit list ever since Eisenhower's fear-mongering domino theory came into international policy. Basically, the thought that all of Asia would fall to communism without American intervention. Around that same time, Sukarno played a key role in organizing the Bandung Conference in 1955, the first large-scale meeting of Asian and African heads of state to discuss the state of third worldism. Now here we get to an extreme bugbear of mine. The use of the word third world is a derogatory term, as it is in the media today, especially American media. It is some colonial BS. Third worldism was a unifying term to create a solidarity between freshly decolonized countries, an identity based on not participating in the Cold War and looking for solutions in their path to recovery after being sucked dry for so long. And of course, this was seen as problematic to the United States in the 1950s. In many ways, I find Sukarno similar to Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran. He nationalized resources, entertained leftist thought, and benefited from playing the superpowers against each other. He was perceived to enjoy the playboy lifestyle, but on these sexual matters, Sukarno surely trounced world leaders of the same time. It's very funny to contemplate how conservative the KGB and the CIA were, thinking a sex scandal could bring the leader to heel, even while he was publicly flouting his polygamous lifestyle. Sometime around 1960, it became known in the intelligence community that the KGB had performed a honeypot mission and filmed Sukarno in a Russian hotel having an orgy of some kind. When pressed by Russia to conform in some manner, or else they would release the tape, Sukarno excitedly asked them to send him an extra copy. The CIA tried to match wits by scouring all of the confiscated porn tapes in an LA cop warehouse for anything that looked like a short Indonesian man banging a tall Russian, but they were unsuccessful. They then moved on to the plan of actually producing a porn film with someone in a Sukarno mask. This may or may not have been in production when they realized a reel of porn in 1960 would not be able to be seen anywhere else that regular pornography was viewed back then, so it was quite useless for propaganda purposes. By the time Genjer Genjer became a pop success in 1965, both British MI6 and the CIA were balls deep in trying to oust Sukarno. Sukarno was propped up by the Communist Party, which was the third largest in the world after Russia and China, and controlled most of the government. America infiltrated the Indonesian army to the point that it was broken into two separate factions according to their loyalties, and they were financing anti-Sukarno units, providing them with communications equipment, and spreading propaganda to stir up racial tensions between the Chinese and Muslim populations. MI6 were basically anywhere and everywhere they could be to stir up tensions, and were pouring in literal millions to overturn the government. Their chance came with possibly the most significant event in modern Indonesian history, the 30th of September movement of 1965. To set the scene, Sukarno was in a bad way. In the year leading up to the event, the US had pulled out their economic aid in response to the ongoing war with Malaysia, to which Sukarno famously said, "To hell with your aid, we can do without aid, we'll never collapse." But the loss of US aid made poverty palpable, and this was a golden cow for the propagandists. Now I have to absolutely claim an inability to explain this attempted coup on the 30th of September. Only a professional Indonesian historian could give it justice, as it's very complicated. And the events of this day are entirely a mess. covered up meticulously by Indonesia's incoming strongman leader, President Suharto. He used the event to solidify power for decades, glorifying his suppression of the communist uprising. Now, the official government version of that event on the 30th of September that year was that a small and disorganized communist army attempted a very sloppy coup before being completely run over by the American-backed army forces. This triggered an unspeakable purge of supposed leftists with a death count between 500,000 and over 3 million over the next few years. In these years following the massacre, some journalists and expatriated Indonesians questioned the new government's narratives. Rather than trying to sort through the ashes to find out who this renegade group was that paved the way for Suharto's brutal regime, I find this fact more telling. The massacre was the model replicated by the CIA in South America in 1971 as Brazil's government partnered with right-wing forces in Chile. CIA paperwork from the time called it the Jakarta method, which is utterly chilling. The wave of murder through the public systems and villages had many levels. The CIA gave Suharto a hit list of political and revolutionary figures they wished to vanquish. However, the propaganda allowed street mobs to kill freely for personal grievances, racial tensions, and village superstition. As seen in the harrowing documentary 40 Years of Silence, an Indonesian Tragedy, a kind of Salem witch trial environment fostered, where people accused others of being communists to prove they were on the side of the new oppressors. Supposed communists were whisked away to labor camps without trial on a lucky day, and buried in shallow graves on a bad day. And so our sweet little song, now over 20 years old, comes back into play. An accusation of singing Genjer Genjer, which had previously been sung in the faces of occupying forces, was enough to invoke bloodlust. Rumors were spread that female PKI members sang the song while dismembering the penises of bound army soldiers, implanting simple peasants with the psychological fear of castration anxiety. Anyone caught absent-mindedly singing the song in the yard was reported and ended up in jail. The myth of Suharto quashing a communist uprising was the basis of his power, and a 1984 ridiculous B-movie docudrama was made celebrating this event. The film was called Treachery of the 30th of September Movement / Indonesian Communist Party. For now, we are just going to reduce it to treachery. The success of this movie in Indonesian culture undoubtedly was the reason why Joshua Oppenheimer's subjects in the documentary The Act of Killing thought it was so okay to discuss their heinous crimes. In its uncut glory, Treachery is a 4.5-hour pain-a-thon. Part reefer madness, part sweet Jew, but with the brutality of a Herschel Gordon Lewis slasher film. The song Genjer Genjer, Lilis Suryani's version, notably, comes in and out as an instrumental theme every time plotting and uncertainty occurs. The PKI soldiers then actually sing it while slashing the throats of army generals, bloodily in an extended scene. It is notable that the bodies of the coup from 1965 were described to have no signs of torture. From 1984, schoolchildren were forced to watch this torture porn film, Ludovico technique style, until 1998, which brings us to the final segue of this saga. My friend, the musician Tomi Simatupang, was one of those millions of schoolchildren forced to watch the propaganda film Treachery. He moved to small-town Germany from Yogyakarta when he was 11 and then on to Berlin. In 2015, he was reminded of the song by Joshua Oppenheimer's documentary and found out that Muhammad Arif's son was unhoused in Jakarta and trying to assemble the funds to build a house. At the time, the song was being covered by many bands and included in film soundtracks. It had lost its taboo nature somewhat, and it seemed ridiculous that the son of a man whose song had been a hit in the 40s, 60s, and 2000s was in such a poor state. However, the stigma never left his family name. Not after his father was surely brutally murdered in the original 1965 putsch, not after the Suharto dictatorship fell, and not after Genjer Genjer became a hit in America. So we organized Tomi's musical presentation about Genjer Genjer. There was a lot of interest in the project immediately, a combination of expat Indonesians interested in the truth from a safe distance and Tomi's star power, and we packed the theater out. There's a video online of Tomi performing Genjer Genjer, which is still my favorite version.
Genjer genjer nong doan ating keleler Genjer genjer nong doan ating keleler Ma iduli tekong bukti genjer Maiduli tekong bukti genjer Oleh sak dino ngungkur sidot sing tuli-tuli Genjer genjer saiki wis digawa So that was the first verse. It was about Genjer growing on the paddy fields and how much of it grows down. And there comes the old mother, or just mother. She comes to take the Genjer, and she turns around and just walks away. Now Genjer is being brought back home. That's it. Genjer, Genjer, Yesu, Yesu, dito nong pasar. Genjer, Genjer, Yesu, Yesu, dito nong pasar. Cecer diumpingi podo di dasar Cecer diumpingi podo di dasar Maicepeng tuku Genjer kobo belasan Genjer, Genjer, saiki wis arep diolah. So the Genjer is brought to the market in the morning. rows and then tied together. And the mothers come. They bring their baskets, their bamboo baskets. And now the Genjer is gonna be cooked.
The camera turns off respectfully on the video before Tomi breaks down on stage. The stress of carrying the song in front of Indonesian diplomats, the history, the memory of when he was traumatized as a child while watching the treachery film depicting a fake history, it was all too much for him that night. A final note. It is almost 70 years after the death of Muhammad Arif, which is generally the period of copyright for a piece of music. We have just a couple of years left to fix the copyright for Muhammad's family. If we are successful, it would mean the family would finally receive the money they deserve, including the royalties for the soundtrack of Treachery of the 30th of September movement, the most watched film in Indonesian history. Thank you for listening to Songlines with Jimmy Trash. I'd like to give a massive thanks to Tomi Simatupang for the research assistance and Big Daddy Magustone for the studio work. I'm not sure where this will be available, but if you would like to hear more, I beg you to contact whichever platform you are listening to and tell them you liked what you heard. There's an Instagram associated with the show too, so please go check it out. Until then, give peace and love to your neighbor, because you don't know when the militia is coming for you.
Mengku sejak sing ecebe